So I'm going to go over tips and tricks. As Jason mentioned, I'm with CADD Microsystems. I've been here now for 8 years, and before that, I did corporate interior design. I'm going to start with some basics because it seems like a great place to go. And who doesn't love a shortcut, as Kate was mentioning earlier? Some of the frequent ones I've put on this screen, as well as some screenshots. There are two that are actually relatively new. Control K and Control Shift I. I'm going to get into more of what those do. Some of my favorite are create a note, switch between the background and the graph, and then the good old F5 to run the graph when you're in manual mode. Searching, you can always search the library. We knew this, and we can right click in the graph space to do a search. They've gotten those to actually return the same results now because they didn't used to. The other thing that's interesting, if you do it in the library, it gives you the name of the group that that node is in, and you can click on that and it will take you to that section in the library so you can find similar nodes with it. If you have to change your outputs from one node to another, like you're modifying your graph, you can hold the shift key and left mouse click. You don't need to drag, it's just a click, and then you click what output you want it to move to. Notes, use them, please, please, please. They give us lots of different ways to create notes. You have group titles. We've had those for years. We've had what I like to call a note node because just note doesn't seem to make sense. That's the Control W. They added the ability to pin those to a node so that when you move the note moves with it, which is great. And they also added the ability to add a description to your group so you can have a short title and then a long description of what in the world's going on. And then finally, if you're using code blocks, you can use 2 forward slashes in a row to create a comment line, and anything on that line will be ignored until you hit the enter key. So just a couple of ways you can add notes. Speaking of code blocks, they are great for shorthand. If you put it in any text inside of double quotes, it'll be counted as a string. If you just type a number, it'll be counted as a number. True and false Boolean values, just type it in lowercase. You can access any of the Dynamo nodes straight from the code block. So if you needed to create a point at a coordinate, as is shown here, you could type in the values, and then you could actually set that to a variable. We can use variables in code blocks, and you can then use that point to create a circle all in one node. Anytime you have a semicolon at the end, that counts as an output and also as a new line. And then if you need a quote, a double quote in text, you need to use the backslash character. That's what's called an escape character. Also, if you need a backslash, like you're putting a file name in, you need to put 2 backslashes because the first one tells the system that it needs to pay attention to the next character. It uses design script. There is a guide that Dynamo BIM put out long ago. It's still valid because they haven't changed it. So it has a lot of things you can do. You can do more with them. Some of the things that people also explore is the definitions and for loops and while loops. But that's getting further into that than I want to. Also, speaking of code blocks, we can make a range and a sequence. This is really more in that design script, less, being able to read it. We have nodes for those two, which is great. Just as a reminder, a range, you specify the start, you specify the end, and what is it going to count by? So in the case of this, you'd get 2, 4, 6, and 8, or 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8. In a sequence, you're specifying where you're starting, 0, how many you want. You want 9, and you're counting by 2. So you would get 0 to 16. And then finally, what we can do that there isn't a node for that I'm aware of is what I would call an advanced range, where you specify the start, you specify the end, and then you specify how many you want, and it calculates an equal spacing. So it's very similar to in Revit using a linear array with last, where you specify the first point, you specify the last point, and how many you want. So in this case, where you're starting at 0, going to 10, and I want 3 of them, it's going to generate the numbers 0, 5, and 10. Some list management. I always find that it's great to go through list lacing because it confuses pretty much everybody. It controls how nodes handle inputs with multiple lists. And those list values could have varying quantities of items in that list. So there's 3 main ones. And then there's auto, where it tries to pick the one that makes the most sense. Shortest is the most common, where it takes a 1-to-1 processing. So item at index 0 goes to 0, 1-to-1, and so on down the line. And whenever it runs out, in whichever list it runs out first, it just stops and ignores the rest. The next one is longest. It does the same thing, except once it runs out on the shorter list, it just processes all the extra to the last one. I'll be honest, I don't find a need for longest all that often. It does have some cases where it's useful. But the next one I find is actually, if you're going to override, I find it's the one that you end up using the most, and that is cross product. This you will use anytime that you want to compare 2 lists, where you want to find out, are these items in this other list of things. In this little example here, we're using the room is inside point, or point is in a room, and it's checking to see if those points exist in the room. You're going to want to set that to cross product. Otherwise, you're never going to get the answer you want. It will, when you set it to cross product, you will always get an additional list level, but it's not doing it randomly. It's easiest to explain when you only have 2 lists like this one. What it's going to do is the lowest list level, in this case, level 1, is going to be the indexes of all the points. And list level 2 is going to match the indices of the first input, in this case, rooms. So at L1 is room 1, or level 2's index 1 is room index 1, and then the 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on match up with the points. So it's not randomly doing this. It's very methodical. And then you can use a get item at index, or index of the true value, to find out if there's only one true. In this case, we were looking for the point on what room it's in, which is why there's a transpose in between there. So theoretically, it should only exist in one room if you filtered your rooms properly. So, and then you can use the get item at index to do that. I went the wrong way. Sorry about that. Data organization, thinking of list levels. Dictionaries are amazing at organizing your data structures. You can just look here. The 1 is lists and indices, and you have to remember that, oh, index 1 is the name, index 2 is the number, index 3 is this, index 1 is the room. If you use a dictionary, those all go to what are called keys. Dictionaries are not indexed. They use a key, which is a string. And so you can actually assign a name to it. So we know that it's the name, we know it's the number, we know it's the room element, and then we can just ask the dictionary for that value. It does have to be a string, so pay attention to that. When you're bringing in Excel data, it works really well if it's like a table. That way you can assign the headers to each value. Also, with organization, sometimes we need to add, or we need to sort items. Sorting the items, because a lot of times when you grab things, it comes in the order it was created. There's 3 different ways of sorting. It all depends on what you want as the output. There's the plain old list sort, which just works mostly with strings. But the 2 more frequent ones are sort by key, which requires both the items that are being sorted and a list with the exact same count. And that's what's going to use to organize the other one. And then there's sort by function. This one I like to point out because the function node says that it's missing an input. It's not. We can ignore that red input because the sorting node knows to take the list input and match it to the input of the function node that is missing an input. So when they added that color coding, I liked it, but at the same rate, it confused people in this situation. So sometimes we need to group. We have very similar nodes with grouping. The one difference between grouping and sorting changes the index order, but it does not change the list levels. Grouping does. So we're completely changing the list level information. We're adding normally at least 1 list level, sometimes more. And data can be sorted within those new groupings. Just pay attention to your list level setting on your input. And then kind of jumping on the what's new kind of thing, autocomplete has been around for a while, but you had to enable it under advanced features or experimental features. So unless you knew it was there, they've gotten it a lot better with predictions and percentages, and it doesn't move your stuff around quite as much as it's shown. Also, in newer versions, you can actually use it on output nodes. So when you're getting started and you're like, what in the world goes into this node? You can double click on it and it will give you a list of the most commonly used ones. After version 2.7, so basically Revit 24 and later, it automatically is enabled. You don't have to go into the settings. Sorry, I don't have the civil version that it's associated with. I don't have that log, but they also added a custom drop-down menu that will work with Dynamo Player. So yes, there's data shapes out there that can create your own personal user interface, but if you don't have to use it, you don't need to. This one lets you specify a drop-down and then a corresponding number. It's frequently used with a get item at index. That way you can give the users a drop-down in Dynamo Player with select options, and then it will pull information as you need it. It's not quite as nice as being able to create a drop-down from the Revit data, but it's kind of a step in the right direction. Insert Dynamo definition. This was added in version 2.18, which was 24.1. Basically what it does is it lets you select another Dynamo script and it inserts the entire script into your file. So if you create a series of files that have frequent combinations of nodes, you can really increase your speed and efficiency at generating new scripts. The example that was here was showing a insert for pulling data from Excel. So it brings in the browse file node, the convert the file path to the file, the Excel import, a string parameter or node, so you can enter what sheet name is, true, false for whether it's reading in string or showing Excel. And then it's even got nodes there that automatically take the table and throw it into a dictionary. All with a simple click. They did add a shortcut for this, Control-Shift-I. I did notice in some versions that if you insert one and then you go to insert a nuller before you close this file, it won't let you. It only lets you insert like one. And then if you close the file and open it again, it'll let you insert again. So I'm not really sure what's going on there, but it still is a great way to speed up frequent combinations. We all love the pin preview. It's so much easier than creating a watch node every time. And we tend to have a whole bunch of them open at once. But when we're done and we're trying to clean everything up and make it readable and add our notes because we skipped that the first time, it's kind of annoying to sit there and close every one. They did add a shortcut key for this in 3.2, which is 25.2, and that is Control K. Speaking about the keeping up with your point versions, there are changes at the point version, new features, not just with Revit, but also with Dynamo. Update Python engine. This was actually in the last release of Revit, the latest one. If you need, sometimes you end up with a whole bunch of Python nodes in a script. Rather than going manually to each one and updating its engine, there's been a lot of talk about the engines and switching the engines in the last couple of versions, and they're going to change it again. This is one place you can go, and it'll either affect every node if you have nothing selected, or it will affect only the Python nodes that you have selected, and you can override it for the entire graph. Right now, you're going to have to deal with this as a package extension that you'll install. It's called TuneUp. After 3.4, which hasn't been put in any version of any software that I'm aware of yet, desktop software anyway, it's included in that version. What this does, it's released by the Dynamo team, and it analyzes and tracks how long each node takes to run in your graph. So you can pinpoint where in your graph is taking the most time. And it allows you to really optimize your graph so that increased speed and time of processing. Jumping back on the dictionaries, looking up a dictionary value, like I was showing in there, is significantly faster than the get item at index. So you can also export this out to a CSV and analyze it in Excel. Just pay attention that, like with data shapes or any of your custom user interfaces, that timing is going to be dependent on whoever it is that's clicking around. So that one you can ignore, but it also has the ability to group everything. It's available as a package extension. I believe it goes all the way back to 22. I know I've tried it in 24 and 5. So a couple of last things, settings. There is a Dynamo settings file. It pretty much has every preference you can want dictated in it. It's an XML file. It's all spelled out. Package folder location, trusted locations, everything like that. If you are managing your company's Dynamo stuff, you're going to want to edit this. Also, a little trick in preferences under group styles, if you already had your own and you don't want to use theirs, it doesn't let you override the ones that are out of the box. If you go to the XML file, you can override them and you can change the colors of like input and everything so you can get it to match your styles, not the one that they're dictating in the preferences. Dynamo Player, it also tracks the folders there. By default, it uses the folder name in that drop-down list. I work on a lot of companies' stuff, and they all have the folder like scripts. And so in my drop-down, it just says scripts, and I can't use that for anything. You can actually change the name of the drop-down that's displayed as opposed to just having the file name or the folder name at the end. And then with that file, if you customize it in one place, it's stored under app data, your Dynamo product folder. It's here. You can actually include that with a custom deployment package. So I'm not talking about Dynamo packages. I'm talking about software deployment packages. in the configurations, all the way down at the bottom, there is a include Dynamo setting file, and you can add that. Now, I will say that I have seen this not deploy, kind of like the Revit INI file doesn't always deploy, but it also works a lot of the time as well. So you might need a manual method to deploy it on the just in case side, but there is a way where you can tie it in and it does get deployed. And then I'm going to end on just some really helpful resources. The Dynamo blog, they normally tell you what's new, and then you're stuck sitting here twiddling your thumbs until they roll it in to your software because you want to see it. The forum, tons of people are there. That thing has been up there for years. It probably has your answer already that you haven't even realized that you wanted to ask, unless it deals with a new functionality. Just because it's been up there for so long and people have figured out the workflows. Our blog, we post stuff every once in a while about it. Revit API docs, that lists everything that you're allowed to do or everything Dynamo can do. It's not the official source, but it pretty much is a copy of it. So if it doesn't say it's possible, that means Dynamo can't do it. Recommended packages, these are your tried and true. If you go to anywhere, you ask anybody, they're going to list all these out. The one on there that may not show up on everyone's list is TuneUp because it's relatively new. And then Lookup or Snoop, it allows you to select elements in the Revit interface and see all of their data properties. Very useful for trying to figure out, is this data at the instance level, the type level, the family level, or the category level? So that is it for my presentation.
Well, you missed a helpful resource, your webinar that's coming out on February 18th.
Oh, I did. I did not do that. That
Well,
shameless
luckily,
plug.
I believe Emily, who's always behind the scenes making things happen, she went ahead and threw that up there in addition to the CAD blog under Nick's area. I went ahead and also threw up the Dynamo primer. That's a fantastic resource. They also have this list of recommended packages, the most downloaded, the most used, the most relied on, all those wonderful things. So definitely
they're
check
pretty
those
much
out.
the same list, regardless of which one of those you pick.
You got it. It's like the same top 10, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. And I will say that custom node, I know what I'm going to be doing when I get back to maternity leave, right? Customizing all my Dynamo scripts to have custom inputs. That's fantastic.
Yep.
So I've even learned something from Nick's presentation. Love that.
They sneak things in there every once in a while.
They do. I've been trying to close my eyes to it, so I'm gonna have a lot to look at when I come back. We do have now two questions, or maybe a comment as well. Heather has a comment. I'm sad I can't get Revit Lookup to install correctly on my computer. That's very unfortunate because Revit Lookup is fantastic. I'll also say Revit API docs is something I use very frequently to understand the API and all of these different kinds of jargon and things that you can type in the code blocks for us that aren't natural coders. That definitely helps.
Sometimes it's just is this even possible thing?
Absolutely.
Like, for the longest time,
the API.
You couldn't create ceilings.
Right.
So,
one question that's a little complicated here. Could we use list lacing to generate views if we have two design options in the same location, like furniture layouts compared to floor layouts? So Nick,
theoretically, yes.
Yeah. I'm not even necessarily sure you would need list lacing depending on how you went about script, right? So it really depends on how you're grabbing or creating those views in the kind of method you're using it. But what you're asking is totally possible.
The obvious one I can think of is the good old enlarged room plans that everybody loves to make from rooms or areas.
You have a scope box, or I guess you could even create a bounding box around the room itself. absolutely. You could totally create views and then just swap what that view is looking at in terms of its design option or any other visibility graphic settings.